In 2008, the Department of Family Services for Maricopa County, Arizona, completed a routine internal audit of its child welfare intake system. The audit concluded that response times had improved, documentation compliance had increased, and staff workload was being managed within acceptable limits. During the same 18-month period, 4 children assigned to the department's non-urgent monitoring category died inside their homes. Each death was reviewed independently. Each was classified as unforeseeable. The case files show no missed deadlines. They show no falsified reports. They show staff acting within policy. What they do not explain is why similar warnings appeared in all 4 records, and why none of them altered the outcome. This channel examines incidents reconstructed from reports, timelines, and institutional records, where outcomes were produced by routine decisions rather than individual intent. If you choose to continue, this examination will rely on documented procedures and recorded actions, not speculation or dramatization. The Maricopa County Child Welfare Intake System operated on a tiered assessment model. Calls were received through a centralized hotline staffed by trained intake specialists. Each call was logged, coded, and scored using a standardized risk matrix. The matrix evaluated factors such as prior reports, caregiver cooperation, visible injuries, household composition, and immediate access to the child. Scores determined response classification. High-risk cases required in-person visits within 24 hours. Moderate cases within 72. Low-risk cases were assigned to monitoring status. Monitoring status did not involve home entry. It involved scheduled follow-ups, phone confirmations, and file reviews. Supervisors reviewed daily intake summaries. Caseworkers managed assigned queues. Performance metrics emphasized timeliness, documentation accuracy, and case throughput. Internal guidance discouraged deviation from the matrix without supervisory approval. Supervisory approval required written justification. Written justification triggered secondary review. According to departmental summaries, the system reduced backlog and improved consistency. Most cases moved through the process without incident. The files examined in this case were unremarkable in format. They contained intake notes, checklist scores, supervisor sign-offs, and routine follow-up logs. Nothing in the initial entries indicated urgency. The first deviation appears as a marginal note in an intake summary dated March 12, 2009. It is brief. It does not alter the assigned risk category. No further comment is attached. The first marginal note did not result in action. It read in full. Caller unusually specific about timing, no corroboration. The intake specialist who logged the call followed procedure. The risk score remained unchanged. The case entered monitoring status. Over the next 4 months, similar notes appeared in 3 additional files. Each involved a different household. Each involved a different intake worker. Each note referenced specificity without verification. Phrases varied slightly. Detailed narrative, no physical indicators. Timeline provided without visible injury. Consistent reporting across calls lacks confirmable evidence. In all cases, the matrix output remained below the intervention threshold. Supervisory reviews did not flag the entries. No policy violation was recorded. Follow-up protocols were executed as written. Caseworkers placed confirmation calls. Voicemails were left when calls were unanswered. Contact attempts were logged. In one instance, a caregiver responded and reported that conditions were stable. That response was recorded and accepted. In another, the phone number on file was disconnected. The system required 2 additional attempts over a 10-day period. Those attempts were made. No home visit was authorized. The anomalies were not dramatic. They did not suggest immediate danger. They suggested pattern awareness without authority. The matrix did not account for narrative persistence. It did not weight repetition unless accompanied by escalation markers. Over time, the notes accumulated. They did not change classification. Internal training documents describe this as expected behavior. The system was designed to prevent overreaction to unverifiable information. In May 2009, one intake worker requested an exception review. The request cited pattern similarity across unrelated cases. The supervisor response was logged 3 days later. The response stated that cross-case pattern analysis was not within intake, scope, and advised adherence to the scoring model. The request was closed. No further escalation was recorded. 5. Midpoint shift. The shift from uncertainty to confirmation occurred after the third death. By that point, the cases were no longer active. The deaths were reported independently by local law enforcement. Each involved domestic circumstances. Each resulted in post-incident review. It was during a routine quality assurance meeting in September 2009 that a data analyst flagged an overlap. The overlap was not demographic. It was procedural. All 4 children had been assigned identical risk scores within a narrow range. All 4 cases included intake notes, referencing unusually precise timelines. All 4 remained in monitoring status until termination. This information was presented as a statistical observation. The meeting minutes do not record discussion. 2 weeks later, an internal memo circulated among senior staff. The memo acknowledged emerging similarities and recommended a limited retrospective review. The language changed at this point. Previous documents used terms such as appears and suggests. The memo used confirmed and identified. It confirmed that the system had received early narrative indicators in all 4 cases. It identified that those indicators were not actionable under existing policy. The memo did not recommend policy change. It recommended documentation clarification. The retrospective review was completed internally. It did not reopen cases. It did not involve external agencies. Its purpose, as stated, was procedural clarity. Reviewers compared intake narratives, scoring outputs, and supervisor responses. What emerged was not a missed warning, but a classification problem. In each file, callers had described future harm in precise terms, not as threats, not as predictions, as scheduled outcomes. The language was consistent across cases. Phrases such as "by the end of the week" and "after the next visit" appeared repeatedly. The statements did not express intent. They described sequence because the callers were not identified as caregivers and because no physical evidence was present at the time of intake. The matrix treated the information as low reliability. The system did not interpret temporal certainty as risk. One reviewer noted this explicitly. The note appears in the margin of a draft summary. Matrix does not evaluate specificity absent corroboration. This observation was not included in the final report. During the review, analysts also identified that 2 of the callers had contacted the hotline more than once. The calls were logged separately. They were not linked. The system did not aggregate narrative similarity across cases. This was consistent with design. In a recorded supervisory discussion, a senior administrator stated that altering the matrix to account for narrative patterning would introduce subjectivity. No objection is documented. The review concluded that staff acted within policy and that outcomes, while adverse, were not preventable under existing frameworks. The report was finalized in November 2009. No public release followed. The final consequence did not occur in a home or an office. It occurred in policy revision. In early 2010, the department updated its training manual. The revision added a single line under intake guidelines. It instructed specialists to document narrative specificity for reference. It did not instruct them to act on it. No changes were made to scoring thresholds. No authority was granted to override the matrix. The system acknowledged the signal without empowering response. This was an irreversible decision. It formalized the distinction between knowing and intervening. The deaths remained classified as unforeseeable. The files remained closed. The Maricopa County intake system remains in operation. Subsequent audits note improvements in data consistency and reporting efficiency. Response times continue to meet benchmarks. Documentation compliance remains high. The risk matrix is still in use. It has been updated to include additional demographic variables and automated alerts. Narrative specificity is now a searchable field. There is no indication that it alters classification outcomes. The 4 deaths reviewed in this case are not referenced in current training materials. They appear only in archived quality assurance files. Those files are not public. No disciplinary action was taken. No legal action followed. The intake workers involved continued employment. Supervisors retained their positions. From an institutional perspective, the system functioned. It received information. It evaluated that information. According to defined criteria, it produced consistent results. What remains unresolved is not whether the system failed. It is whether a system that cannot act on knowledge should be considered operational. The records do not address this. They end where procedure ends. And that is where this case remains.